My name is Frances Walker. I'm 59 years old and I taught fourth grade in a small Ohio town for 28 years. 3 months ago, my divorce was finalized. What I'm about to share isn't just my story, it's a roadmap for anyone who feels trapped between what looks right and what feels true. Let me start with something nobody tells you about divorce at my age. People assume you've given up. They think you're running from something instead of running toward yourself. But here's the first truth I learned. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's the most honest thing you can do. My marriage lasted 34 years. 34 years of shared meals, shared bills, shared silence. Tom wasn't a bad man. He never raised his hand, never cheated, never gambled away our savings. He was exactly what everyone said I should want. Stable, predictable, present. And that was precisely the problem. Somewhere between year 15 and year 20, we stopped being partners and became habits. We were two people sharing space, managing logistics, coordinating schedules. We talked about the water heater and the grocery list and whose turn it was to call the plumber. But we stopped talking about dreams. We stopped talking about feelings. We stopped really talking at all. Here's what I need you to understand right now, and this might save you years of heartache. Loneliness isn't just about being alone. The deepest loneliness happens when you're lying next to someone every night and still feel completely invisible. That's where I lived for almost 2 decades. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was grading papers at the kitchen table. Tom was watching television in the living room. We'd been in the same house for 4 hours and hadn't said 10 words to each other. And suddenly, like a lightning bolt, I realized this was my life. This was what I'd chosen. This was what I was teaching my students to aspire to when I talked about commitment and marriage. That night, I couldn't sleep. I started thinking about my students, those bright-eyed 9 and 10-year-olds. I thought about what I told them every single day. Be brave. Ask questions. Don't settle for less than you deserve. Stand up for yourself. And I realized I was the biggest hypocrite in that classroom. The next morning, I made an appointment with a counselor, not a marriage counselor, just someone for me. That was the first time in 34 years I'd done something for myself without asking permission or explaining why. Tom didn't even notice. Now, here's something valuable I learned in those early therapy sessions. Most people think divorce means failure, but staying in something dead isn't success. It's just fear with a prettier name. My therapist asked me one question that changed everything. She said, "Frances, if your best friend described your marriage to you, what advice would you give her?" I sat there silent for a full minute. Then I started crying because I would have told her to leave years ago. I would have told her she deserved more. I would have told her that life is too short to live it as a shadow. But I couldn't say that to myself. Not yet. The decision to ask for divorce took 6 more months. 6 months of gathering courage like kindling for a fire. 6 months of imagining the worst case scenarios. 6 months of lying awake at night, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Here's a practical truth for you. The fear of change will always feel bigger than the pain of staying. Always. Your brain is wired that way. It prefers familiar misery over unknown possibility. Understanding that helped me push through the paralysis. When I finally told Tom I wanted a divorce, he looked genuinely shocked. That shocked me. How could he not see what I'd been living with? How could he not feel the distance between us? But then I realized he'd been just as lonely, just as disconnected. He just learned to accept it as normal. We sat at that same kitchen table where I'd graded thousands of papers, and we talked more honestly than we had in 15 years. There were tears, there was confusion, but there wasn't anger, and that told me everything. We didn't even have enough passion left to fight. Let me give you something concrete right now. If you're wondering whether your marriage is struggling or truly over, ask yourself this. When something good happens to you, is your partner the first person you want to tell? When something hurts you, are they the first person you turn to? If the answer is no, pay attention to that. For me, I'd stopped sharing my joys and my hurts with Tom years earlier. When I got recognition at school, I'd tell my sister first. When I was worried about my health, I'd call my friend Janet. Tom had become the last person I wanted to be vulnerable with. That's not a marriage, that's a business arrangement. The divorce process itself was surprisingly civil. We'd accumulated plenty of things over 3 decades: the house, the retirement accounts, the furniture, the photo albums. Dividing it all felt like dismantling a museum exhibit. Here's the couch where we used to talk. Here's the bed where we used to hold each other. Past tense. Everything past tense. Tom got the house. I took enough money to start over. Some people thought I was crazy for not fighting for more, but I didn't want more things. I wanted more life. And you can't put a price on that. Here's what happened that I didn't expect. The moment I signed those papers, I felt 20 pounds lighter, physically lighter, like I'd been wearing a backpack full of stones and finally set it down. The relief was so profound, I actually laughed out loud in the lawyer's office. Now I'm living in a small apartment on the edge of town, 2 bedrooms, decent light, close to the school where I still teach. I bought furniture that I actually like instead of furniture that matches what we already had. I painted the walls colors Tom would have hated. I play music he never wanted to hear. These small acts of self-determination feel revolutionary. Here's something nobody tells you about starting over at 59. Society treats you like you're supposed to be winding down, getting ready for retirement, accepting your lot. But I feel like I'm winding up, like I'm finally becoming the person I was supposed to be before I made myself smaller to fit someone else's expectations. Let me give you real value right now. If you're considering divorce, especially later in life, the financial fear is real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. I went from a 2-income household to living on a teacher's salary. I had to create a completely new budget. I had to learn to manage money alone for the first time in decades. But here's what I discovered. I need less than I thought. So much of what we spent money on was about maintaining appearances or filling emotional voids. Now I spend money on things that actually matter to me. Books, coffee with friends, a pottery class I've wanted to take for years. My bank account is smaller, but my life is bigger. The hardest part hasn't been the practical stuff. It's been navigating the social fallout. Some friends disappeared completely. They didn't know how to act around a divorced woman. Some took sides even though there weren't really sides to take. Some asked probing questions disguised as concern, fishing for the scandal they assumed must exist. But here's the unexpected gift. The friends who stayed became deeper, truer friendships. And I made new friends. People I met through my newfound freedom. People who saw me as Frances, not as Tom's wife or as half of a couple. Being seen as a whole person for the first time in decades is extraordinary. My family struggled with it too. My mother, who's 83, kept asking what Tom did wrong. She couldn't comprehend leaving a marriage without a villain. She grew up in an era where you stayed no matter what, where divorce meant shame and failure. I had to learn to be okay with her disappointment. That was its own kind of grief. But my younger nieces have told me I inspired them. One left a relationship she'd been unhappy in for years. Another started speaking up about her needs instead of swallowing them. That's legacy. That's what matters. Let me tell you about the unexpected joy I found. Remember how I said I taught 4th grade for 28 years? I realized I'd been teaching on autopilot for at least the last 10, going through the motions, following the curriculum, counting down to summer break. But this year, something shifted. I started really seeing my students again, their curiosity, their resilience, their honesty. Kids that age say exactly what they mean. They don't perform emotions they don't feel. They don't stay in situations that make them miserable just because someone else expects them to. They reminded me how to be authentic. One of my students asked me recently why I seemed different this year. This perceptive little girl with braids and glasses looked at me and said, "Miss Walker, you smile more now, like a real smile, not a teacher smile." Out of the mouths of babes, right? Here's something practical I learned about rebuilding your identity after divorce. You have to grieve who you were, even if who you were wasn't happy. I'd been Tom's wife for longer than I'd been just Frances. I had to relearn how to introduce myself, how to attend events alone, how to make decisions without consulting anyone. The first time I went to a movie by myself, I felt self-conscious. I thought everyone was staring at the sad divorced woman sitting alone with her popcorn, but nobody was looking. Nobody cared. And by the end of the film, I realized I'd enjoyed it more because I wasn't worried about whether someone else was enjoying it. I could just be present. That's become my practice now, presence. For years, I lived in the past, remembering when the marriage was good or in the future, hoping it would get better again, but never in the now. Now I'm learning to live right here, this moment, this breath, this choice. Dating at 59 is bizarre. I won't lie. I tried one of those apps for about a week before deleting it. Too many men my age looking for nurses or caretakers. Too many profiles that read like job descriptions. But I'm not in a hurry. For the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely happy alone. If partnership comes, wonderful. If it doesn't, I'm still whole. Here's what I want you to hear clearly. Your worth isn't determined by your relationship status. Not at 25, not at 45, not at 59. You are not half a person looking for completion. You are entirely yourself. And if a relationship isn't adding to that, if it's subtracting from it, you have permission to walk away. People ask if I'm scared about aging alone. Honestly, sometimes. But I was scared aging with someone I'd grown to resent too. At least this fear comes with freedom. At least I'm facing the unknown on my own terms. I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something else matters more than the fear. What mattered more to me was authenticity, living a true life instead of a comfortable lie, showing up as myself instead of as whoever I thought I should be. Tom and I barely speak now. There's no animosity, just nothing left to say. We divided our shared history and went our separate ways. I heard through mutual friends that he's dating someone. I felt nothing when I heard that. Not jealousy, not regret, not vindication, just neutral acknowledgement. That's how I knew I'd made the right choice. Here's a question I get asked a lot. Do I regret the 34 years? No. Those years taught me what I don't want. They gave me clarity. They showed me that security without joy is just a prettier cage. And I learned I'm strong enough to leave the cage. I also learned that divorce doesn't erase history. Tom and I built a life together. We had good years before we had hollow ones. I can honor that without wanting to return to it. Both things can be true. For anyone watching this who's in a marriage that feels dead, here's my advice. First, try, really try. Go to counseling, read the books, have the hard conversations. Make sure you've exhausted every genuine option. Not so you can say you tried, but so you can know you did. But if you've tried everything and you're still drowning in indifference, if you've given it years and nothing has changed, you're allowed to stop. You're allowed to say this isn't working. You're allowed to choose yourself. Second piece of advice, get your own support system before you make any moves. Find a good therapist, talk to trusted friends, join a support group. Line up your emotional resources because you're going to need them. This process will challenge everything you think you know about yourself. Third, make a financial plan. Divorce has practical implications. Figure out what you'll need to live independently. Open your own bank account if you don't have one. Understand your assets and debts. Knowledge is power, and financial clarity reduces fear. Fourth, be prepared for judgment. People will have opinions about your choices. Family will question you. Friends might distance themselves. Strangers will make assumptions. You have to build a thick enough skin to weather that storm while staying soft enough to feel your own truth. Fifth, give yourself grace. You're going to have days where you question everything, days where you feel guilty or scared or overwhelmed. That's normal. That's human. Don't judge yourself for the hard days. Just keep moving forward. I'm not going to stand here and tell you divorce is easy. It's not. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. But living inauthentically was harder. Pretending was harder. Slowly disappearing was harder. What I have now is messy and uncertain and completely mine. I wake up in my small apartment and I get to decide what kind of day I want to have. I get to decide what I eat, what I watch, what I think about. Those small freedoms add up to a life worth living. I'm rebuilding my relationship with myself, learning what I actually like instead of what I learned to tolerate, discovering that I'm funny and capable and stronger than I knew. At 59, I'm finally growing into the woman I was always meant to be. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. Your life is yours, not your spouse's, not your parents', not your children's, yours. And you get to decide what you do with it. You get to decide what you're willing to accept and what you're not. You get to decide when enough is enough. For me, enough was enough at 59. I wish I'd realized it earlier, but I'm grateful I realized it at all. Some people live their entire lives in quiet desperation, never finding the courage to change. I almost was one of them, but I made a different choice. And 3 months out, with my whole life rearranged, with uncertainty in every direction, I can tell you I've never been happier. Not happy like fireworks, happy like peace, happy like coming home to myself. If you're facing a similar choice, I see you. I understand the fear. I understand the complexity. I understand the grief of leaving something that looks fine from the outside but feels empty on the inside. And I'm here to tell you that you're not crazy. You're not ungrateful. You're not broken. You're just waking up. And once you're awake, you can't go back to sleep, nor should you. My name is Frances Walker. I'm 59 years old. I'm a teacher, a friend, a sister, an aunt. And for the first time in decades, I'm fully myself. That's worth everything.